Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 2016 Hack Summit. We're joined here by Uncle Bob Martin, who has been a software professional since 1970 and has been an international software consultant since 1990. And Bob Martin created the software craftsmanship movement. And we are huge fans of software craftsmanship here. In fact, the Hack Pledge movement is all about helping each other become better craftspeople in software. And the last 40 years, Robert has worked in various capacities for literally hundreds of software projects. In 2001, he initiated the meeting of the group that created the Agile software development from extreme programming techniques and served as the first chairman of the Agile Alliance. He's also a leading member of the World Wide Web software craftsmanship movement, Clean Code. So Bob, thank you so much for being here today.
I'm very pleased to be here.
So we're going to be doing a fireside chat with Bob today. And if you have questions for Bob, then just please ask them in the window and we will address them during the broadcast. So Bob, maybe you can get the audience warmed up here by having them understand a little bit more about your background and maybe how you grew up and how you first got into software development.
Oh, heavens. So the way I first got into software development, let me show you that. All right, so I have brought over a little plastic computer. And as you can see, it has 3 bits that go from 0 to 1. You'll see them off on your screen to the right. There are 3 flip-flops that can have 0 or 1 states, which means that there are 8 possible states for this machine. And there are several AND gates, these little metal rods here that I'm flipping. These are AND gates. And they have little springs in them, little rubber bands that keep them in place. And when you cycle the machine, those AND gates test the state of the flip-flops. You program this machine by slipping little tubes on these pegs down here. That'll block the AND gates from plopping in. And then there are some tubes on this side that will change the states of the flip-flops. So in essence, is a finite state machine with 3 flip-flops and 6 AND gates that can manipulate the flip-flops. And you can program it to count up or count down or do little logic puzzles. My mother bought this for me when I was 12, and it fascinated me. And I had to learn everything about it. And I studied and studied. I learned Boolean algebra. I learned logic. I was able to eventually figure out how to make this machine do what I wanted it to do. And the day that happened, the day that I put my first program into this machine and made it do what I wanted it to do, changed my life. I wanted to be a programmer from that point on. I was going to be the master of all these machines, but this is the one that started it all.
Wow, and is that the original that you had when you were a kid?
This is the one that I purchased about 10 years ago on eBay. The original is in a much more protected place. I don't pull that one out, but this is the same era. It's the same plastic. Didn't suffer as badly as the original one did. So I keep that one much more.
That's great, Bob. Wow. Are there any other interesting gadgets back there on that shelf other than that you want to show us?
There's lots of interesting gadgets. So here is a little computer that a buddy of mine and I built when we were sophomores in high school. This was at an era when integrated circuits were brand new, and we were using RTL integrated circuits, relay transistor logic circuits. There's a bunch of them in here. I don't know if you can see them. Hold it up for you. There's a whole bunch of little integrated circuits in there. There's also just a bunch of discrete transistors and stuff. This is a machine that could calculate in binary. It was an 18-bit calculator, could add, subtract, multiply, and divide if you threw the switches correctly. This was one of my high school projects. Well, they didn't ask me to do it in high school. It's just my buddy and I did this in high school, mostly over the summer. Got it all working. It sits on my shelf too. all little mementos from my deranged childhood.
That's great, Bob. Wow, amazing. So, so tell me, I'm kind of curious about the name. So the nickname Uncle Bob. Where
Oh,
does that
yeah.
come from?
Okay, so this comes from 1985. I was working at a company called Clear Communications. And we were all working in Unix on Spark stations and writing lots of C code. And our goal was to take over the network management market. We were going to manage all of the T1 lines in the world. And we had visions of massive screens with maps of circuits on them that were flashing red when they went down, you know, the whole 9 yards. There was a programmer there. His name was Billy Fogel. And he had a nickname for everybody. And mine was Uncle Bob. And he would use it in the most annoying possible way. Uncle Bob, I need this, I need that. Uncle Bob said this, Uncle Bob said that. So it made me nuts. And I left that company, not because of him, but I left that company eventually, as one does. And suddenly no one was calling me Uncle Bob. And I thought, whoa, I need somebody to call me Uncle Bob. So I email signature just at the moment, really use my network presence to communicate a lot about object-oriented design and C++. And all of a sudden people started calling me Uncle Bob again, and I thought, ooh, I got to stop this. And I took it out of my email signature, but it didn't work. Everybody kept on calling me Uncle Bob. And then a few years later, I realized that it was probably a good brand. So I've kept it ever since.
That's great.
Yeah. Well,
Wait, so how did the original developer come up with the name Uncle? Why was he calling you Uncle Bob?
Well, that's a very good question. If you remember one of the original magazines in the personal computer space was called Dr. Dobbs Journal of Computer Calisthenics and Orthodontia. And Dr. Dobbs' name was Bob Dobbs. Uncle Bob Dobbs. And that's why this guy picked Uncle Bob for me.
Ah, I see. Very nice. So, you know, software craftsmanship is one of the things that you're very passionate about. You started the software craftsmanship movement. Not everyone in our audience may be familiar with software craftsmanship. So maybe what would be helpful would be for you to kind of just give a quick overview of the problem that software craftsmanship is trying to solve, and then how you're proposing we address some of those issues through this movement.
Okay, so you cut out there for a little while, but I caught some of that. So let me address what I caught first. You said that I started the software craftsmanship movement. This is not quite correct. I was certainly there, but I was not the person who started it, nor was I the principal in starting it. I was just there to lend moral support. The folks who started it were the folks at 8th Light. My son was very much involved. There were several other folks that were deeply involved, and I kind of stood in the background and nodded my head sagely and acted like I knew something. But the real credit goes to those guys. So that's at least one part of the question you asked me. Now, what was the rest of it?
So I think a lot of our audience members may want to learn about what is software craftsmanship and the problem that may help address in software development.
So software craftsmanship is a very simple idea. Every day you should go home out. Like you have pride of workmanship, pride in what you have accomplished and the way that you accomplished it. Craftsmanship is another word for professionalism. It's another word for ethical responsibility. It is a way of saying there are certain things that I will not do. There are certain lines that I will not cross. There are certain standards that I will uphold. And within those bounds, I will do the best job that I can. Software developers often feel like they are not allowed to do a good job. They often feel like they are pressured to meet schedules at the expense of, I don't want to use the word quality because that's not quite the right word, but at the expense of professionalism or at the expense of craftsmanship. And the craftsmanship movement is a movement that says you are never put in the position where you must deliver at the expense of your ethics. You are never put in the position where you must deliver at the expense of your professionalism or your craftsmanship, because the best way to deliver fast, the best way to meet deadlines as quickly as possible, is to uphold those beliefs and those standards. Software developers get caught in the belief that they go faster when they rush. A professional understands that you never go faster when you rush. You only create delays for yourself. And sometimes people will say, well, it's true that I'll create delays for myself in the long term, but in the short term, I can go faster by rushing. And even that is not true. Rushing always causes you to slow down. It may feel faster, but that feeling is an illusion. Rushing always causes you to slow down. It always makes a mess for other people to clean up. It always slows everybody else down. The only way to go fast is to go well. And that, if you wish, is the mantra that I use to define craftsmanship. The only way to go fast is to go well.
And so have you seen examples of organizations, projects, or teams that have been actively embracing craftsmanship who did not embrace craftsmanship in the past, and that it has transformed their software development internally?
So you cut out there at the last bit, but I think I caught most of that. And I think what you were asking is if I have seen companies that have turned around, that started badly and then changed and became better. And the answer to that is no, or at least not very many. It turns out to be very difficult to change the attitude of an organization. And it's something that I tried to do for years and years and never saw great success. Sometimes I saw temporary success. Sometimes I saw transient success. But in the long run, companies are very difficult to change. What I have seen, however, is individuals who change, individuals who improve, and improve dramatically. And then those individuals, if they are caught in a company which does not embrace the same values, leave. A divorce happens. And those individuals will go to another company where those values are embraced. And so what we're seeing in the community right now, as far as I can witness, is this movement of people, movement of software developers towards companies who espouse the values that they believe are most effective. And we wind up with whole companies that have adopted craftsmanship values and whole companies that have not. And that sets up a lovely competition, which I'm sure I know which side is going to win. Now, sometimes companies, by great force of will, can make a change. I have not seen much of this happen. I have seen companies start. I have seen them make a change for maybe even a year and a half. And then something happens and they revert back to the old ways. In one case that I know of, there was an extremely successful team that had changed over entirely, and they were dedicated to craftsmanship goals and agile development, and they were doing very well. And there were articles published about them in Computer World, and you know, they were raving, and it was wonderful. And the guy who put them on the path was promoted. He became a vice president, and another guy came in to take over the team, and he killed all the lion cubs. and shut it all down and reverted right back to the way things were. Organizations have a tremendous amount of inertia. They don't like to change. So that is my experience.
Thank you, Bob. So let's see. So one other question I have before we go to the audience here. By the way, there's a little bit of feedback in the speaker. Maybe turn down the speaker volume just slightly on your end.
Oh, sure. My speaker volume? Sure.
Just a little bit, yeah. So, so, you know, over the years, I'm sure that you've noticed a lot of evolutionary changes in how companies are building software. Do you think that generally companies are on a good track right now doing good things? Or is anything today about how software development is being practiced worry you?
What worries me right now most about software development is how critical it is becoming to our society. It used to be that a software developer couldn't kill anybody. That's changed. Software developers can now kill people and probably kill quite a few people if they make enough mistakes. There's software running in virtually everything we touch. If you are a person living in the Western world, you interact with software on a second-by-second basis without knowing it. You may have an iPhone, tons of software in that iPhone. You may have an Apple Watch, tons of software in that thing. Your car has got loads of software. The intercom system in your house, if you have one, the thermostat you use, the ovens that you use, the dishwashers, the washing machines, everything in your house is driven by software. Everything in the buildings around you is driven by software. The political systems that we employ are driven by software. The legal enforcement systems that we use are driven by software. The commercial systems we use are driven by software. Software dominates absolutely every aspect of our lives, and we don't quite notice this yet. We software developers control everything. People don't quite get this yet. Even we don't quite get this yet. But we rule the world. And unfortunately, we who rule the world are an undisciplined group. We don't think of ourselves as being the puppet masters of the world at large. We think of ourselves as kind of geeky guys who like to code and play with starships and stuff like that. And here we are writing the code that people's lives depend upon. That makes me worried about the future. How many people have been killed by Stack Overflows in the control software of cars? And the answer to that is dozens. How many people have been injured? Hundreds, because somebody didn't count the stack depth correctly in a process running in an embedded environment in the engine of a car. How many people are likely to die next year because some software guy forgot something? How many fortunes will be lost? How many hundreds of millions of dollars will be flushed down the tubes because a software developer forgot to turn off a server at just the right moment? These are becoming very serious things in our society, and it scares me. What scares me is that our governments will figure this out, and then our governments will act, and those governments' actions will be ham-handed and clumsy. They will try to enforce upon us processes and procedures and sign-offs and educations, and they'll try to micromanage us. And that's not going to work very well. We have to do that first. We have to discipline ourselves first, so that when government comes to us, we can lay out all of the disciplines for them, and we can say to them, these are the rules we follow. If you want to give them the force of law, fine. But this problem, and we're not doing that yet, so that scares me.
Thank you, Bob. So we're going to go to a few audience questions here. Sure. And before I ask the audience any questions, I want to ask you if you had any questions for the audience, because we can ask them multiple choice questions to survey them to see if there's
I
anything
did put something on the survey.
Okay,
and
so we
I
actually
think
do have a question that you asked here, which is, do you practice test-driven development at work? And
yes.
you know, I'd love to see more answers to this as we go on here. But so
Good.
far, we've got a couple hundred results.
Good.
And it's actually pretty evenly split. There's a slight bias towards no. About 56% are saying no, and about 45% are saying yes. So
okay. Now let's.
What do those results mean to you, Bob?
But let's suppose that those numbers are accurate and the people who are responding are telling the truth. That's incredible. If I had asked that question 10 years ago, when test-driven development had only been really around in the public for 5 years, the answer would have been under 5%. Even if I'd asked that question 2 years ago, the answer would have been no more than 20%. Now you're telling me you're getting a result that's close to 50%. That's a very, very interesting number. There are, half the developers, at least attending this conference, are practicing test-driven development. That's very, very good news. It's not good news because test-driven development is a great thing. Its developers are adopting disciplines. I don't want to say that it doesn't matter what the discipline is, because it does matter. But the mere fact that 50% of the developers are willing to adopt a discipline, any discipline, is a very encouraging number.
That's great. So, okay, let's go to the Q&A here. So the first question from Breno Sarkis with 100 votes is, if you could meet yourself when you were 25, what career advice would you give? So if you could meet yourself 1 year ago, Bob, what career advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, okay. So this is an interesting question for me because I would not give myself any advice at all because my life has turned out perfectly. So if I were to if I were to see myself at age 25, if I walked through a time warp and saw myself at age 25, I would run away very fast in fear that I might ruin the future that young man had. However, if someone who was 25 today asked me what they should be doing, my answer would be complicated. There's a few answers to it. Now, the first answer is real simple. Do what you love doing. Don't let anybody talk you. You can make a perfectly fine career for yourself as a software developer for the next several decades, I'm sure. If you want to go into management, that's fine, but don't think that that's what you have to do. You don't have to do that. You can be as technical as you want to be for as long as you want to be technical. 2, learn. Keep learning. Don't stop learning, no matter what. There is no perfect language. You have not reached the pinnacle if you are great at Java or great at .NET or great at F# or great at whatever the cool language is at the moment. There's another language out there. There's another framework out there. You keep learning them and learn them and learn them. And you learn new techniques and you read voraciously. You get books and you inhale them. You keep on reading. All of this work will be done probably after hours because you have to give your employer at least 40 hours of your time every week. And another 20 hours of your time every week is going to go into the sheer love of learning. This is just one of the things that a professional learns, that you are going to be investing a lot of time, a lot of your personal time. And some people say, well, I got family life, and that's perfectly fair. You get to trade, family versus profession or whatever, but the trade-off is there. You are going to have to make it. And if you want to be a professional software developer, there is a big chunk of time you're going to have to spend learning and practicing and exercising, and don't begrudge that time, because that time you're doing it because you love doing it. What else could I tell the 25-year-old? My problem when I was 25 was that I had a heck of a time paying attention to dates. Dates never meant a thing to me. I still have that problem, frankly. In fact, somebody's got a question up here. When is this clean architecture book going to be ready? Yeah, it'll be ready pretty soon, I think. I'm working on it. At 25, I had a big problem with dates. So if you find that you have a problem with dates and commitments, learn how to use a calendar really well. And, these nice tools now that you can tell to remind you to do things, that would be a good idea. And that's probably the end of my rant on what I'd tell a 25-year-old.
Thanks, Bob.
Sure.
So next question is from Craig with 109 votes. What widely accepted best practices do you think are the least helpful or actually are bad practices?
Ooh, that's interesting. What widely accepted best practices? Okay. One. I'm going to do it by example. Oh, man, we think Spring is really cool and this dependency injection thing is really, really wild. And we've got to just inject every dependency in the world. And look at these funny little @ signs you can put in your source code, auto-wired. Let's auto-wire the world. That's an example of a more general problem, which I don't call a best practice, but it is a practice. It is the tendency of young software developers to believe that the authors of frameworks have their best interests at heart. The authors of frameworks don't care about you at all. The authors of frameworks care about themselves. They have their own problems. They have solved their problems by creating a framework. They, of course, want you to use that framework. But you, as a software developer, should look at those frameworks with a very jaded eye. And the first question you should ask yourself is, how is this guy going to screw me? And treat those frameworks with a certain amount of skepticism is probably the best word. I would not follow, you know how framework authors always write out the sample application. If you just do it this way, life will be cool. Sometimes the framework author will actually write a little wizard program that will help you write the first few hundred lines of source code. If you just use my wizard, it'll build the whole thing for you, and then all you have to do is fiddle it into place. And no, don't fall for that trap. Keep yourself in control of the software that you are writing. Keep the frameworks at a slight distance. You should use them because they're good. Just keep them at a slight distance. Don't bring the family jewels, the business rules, the stuff that makes your company or saves your company money. Don't bring that in to the framework and give it to the framework. Keep that stuff separate.
Makes sense. Now, do you think that the advent and rise of open source and the fact that we now have access to the underlying code behind the frameworks, does that help a little bit in terms of not being pigeonholed into a black box that you can't get out of?
Almost not. So you think of a framework like Rails, and how many people use Rails as though it were a black box, and how many people open up that black box and fiddle with it? And the answer to that is everybody uses it as a black box. Hardly anybody fiddles with it. And if anybody does fiddle with it, they are punished by the next release. So they can't fiddle with it. So I don't think open source was or is the answer to that problem. And the way I treat frameworks is I just keep them at a distance. I will use them, but I will not enthusiastically adopt them.
It's a great point. Great point, Bob. So the next question is from Craig as well. So of the solid principles, which are the ones that you see people misunderstanding or getting wrong most often?
Well, and I fault myself for this. The principle that is least understood is the single responsibility principle, because it has the worst name. it really shouldn't be called the single responsibility principle. It should be called something else, and I don't know what that name should be. The problem with it is that people believe that it means that a class should do one thing well, and that's not what the principle says. The principle says that a class should have only one reason to change, and that reason to change is a person or an entity in the organization. The code is responsible to some entity in the organization, and that entity is going to ask for changes. And that's what I want. I want your code to have a single changer. Every class should have one entity out there that can request changes. I don't want multiple entities in the organization asking you to make changes, and all those changes focus in on a single module or a single class. That forces you, the designer, to separate your code in a way that if a request comes from the accounting department, it winds up in one module. If a request comes from the human resources department, it comes into another module, and those modules don't cross. That's the single responsibility principle, which is, I think, the one that most people get wrong.
Thank you, Bob. So we'll come back to the audience in just a second here, but I want to cover some more ground with Bob over some of the other initiatives he's been involved in. So let's talk about Agile for a second here, Bob. So maybe you could, just in case there are some audience members who aren't up to speed on this, can you kind of briefly describe the Agile Manifesto?
The Agile Manifesto. So if we go all the way back to 1995, there were people who were beginning to get very frustrated with the heavyweight processes that we were using at the time, the waterfall processes and their ilk. And those folks started writing papers. Jim Copleen wrote a number of patterns about the most successful projects and the most successful companies. And in that list of patterns, you could see the beginnings of agile thought. Ken Schwaber and Martin DeVoe and Mike, his name escapes me at the last minute, wrote a lovely paper about Scrum in 1995, where they talked about what we now call the Scrum process. A little bit different than we think of it now, but those ideas were beginning to percolate. By 1999, Kent Beck had begun to popularize the notion of extreme programming. He'd actually been practicing it probably since 95 or before, but he started to popularize the idea. He came up with the name extreme programming because the idea of extreme sports was really popular in the late 90s. People jumping out of helicopters and landing on their skis or snowboards, extreme sports. By 2001, there were quite a few different organizations and thought leaders that had published papers on these topics. So there was Kent Beck with extreme programming, there was Ken Schwaber with Scrum, there was Pete Code with feature-driven development, there was Alistair Coburn with his Crystal movement, there was a whole big European movement, DSDM. There were all of these folks that were presenting alternatives to waterfall, and all these alternatives were similar. So we convened a conference called the Lightweight Methods Conference in 2001 at Snowbird, Utah. And we started that conference by saying we need a manifesto. And after that, it was just chaos for a while. And then all of a sudden, and nobody remembers who did this. And we talked to them about it a while ago. No one remembers who had the idea, but someone had the idea that we should write down, not that we were against anything, waterfall, but that we valued it. We valued waterfall. We valued the ideas that were carried by waterfall, but we valued these other ideas more. And that just crystallized everything. Then all of a sudden we had these 4 lines that I can't quote for you at the moment, But the 4 wonderful lines that head the Agile Manifesto, everything kind of settled out except the name. We didn't know what to call it. And we voted, and nobody liked the name lightweight. That was my favorite. I liked lightweight, but nobody liked that. And other people thought it should be adaptive, and other people thought it should be this or that. And somebody floated the word agile, and we all kind of went, ooh, agile. But then when we held the vote, it was the name that had the least negative votes. So that was the name that stuck.
That's a great story. So thank you for telling that story. So now that we've set that base, maybe you could talk about a few of the key Agile practices that you are most passionate about, that you think the audience can potentially use in their software development processes to make a potential impact in their development.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to repeat that question because you cut out in the middle, and I'm not sure what it was.
Sure. What are some key Agile practices that you think software development organizations can benefit from?
Okay, all right. So the Agile has come a long ways. When we initially started this, none of us had any idea that Agile Manifesto website was going to amount to anything. Ward Cunningham offered to put it up, and we all said, okay, go ahead. And Ward came up with this brilliant idea that he would let people sign it. And tens of thousands of people signed it. We didn't expect that. We didn't know. The idea that percolated at that Snowbird meeting is best crystallized by something that Kent Beck said at the meeting. He said that the reason we're here is to heal the divide between business and programming, because these two don't understand each other and they don't trust each other. That was the goal of Agile, to heal the divide, to generate trust between these two very different kinds of people. And in that, we have pretty well failed. And we have failed because the Agile movement has moved off in a business direction and left the technical direction behind. Scrum became almost entirely a business process. Most of the Agile stuff now is focused on project management and business, and where are the technical practices? Where's the stuff that we started with? The practices that glued the technology team together and bound them to the business team. Things like pair programming and simple design and test-driven development and functional testing, and this whole inner kernel of business of technical practices. The Agile movement has moved away from those technical practices to a certain degree, and that's a significant problem because it creates a scenario in which there's plenty of business practice to help you drive the project fast, but there's no technical practices to keep the technology under control. And so you wind up with a great way to make a mess at real fast speed.
And why do you think this happened, Bob? Why have technical practices been left at the wayside?
Well, if I had to pinpoint something, it would be the notion of certified Scrum Masters. The very idea that you can certify someone in a 2-day course. So now I need to confess something. The very first certified Scrum Master course took place in my office. Ken Schwaber came to me and said, hey, I got a bunch of guys who want to take this course and I need a classroom. And I said, well, I got a classroom, you can use it. And he explained the course to me. And I frankly, I thought it was a dumb idea, but okay, go ahead. And it turned out not to be a dumb idea at all. It turned out to be a very popular idea. And probably nothing moved us across the chasm, moved the Agile movement across the chasm more than certified Scrum Master classes, because everybody suddenly wanted to be a certified Scrum Master. The problem surfaced several years later was that the folks who were signing up for these courses and the folks who were becoming certified Scrum Masters were not programmers. They were project managers. And so there was this, let's call it a population problem. Way too many project managers, not enough programmers, and everything got skewed. And the technical practices languished. This is one of the reasons that the craftsmanship movement was started. One of the goals of the craftsmanship movement was to knock on the Agile movement's door and say, hey, remember us? We're still here. And so far, that hasn't been effective. The two movements have separated. Now they're separate things, which is exactly the opposite of what Kent Beck had wanted. Kent Beck said, let's heal the divide. And what we've done instead is amplify the divide, or at least reinstate the divide. So the best thing that could happen to the Agile movement is a reunification with the craftsmanship movement. These two movements ought to be the same movement. They ought to be the same people. They ought to have the same goals. They ought to have the same conferences. They ought to have the same meetings. They should not be separate things. And that's what I hope happens in the next several years. I am greatly encouraged that the Agile Alliance has opened up a technology conference. I will be speaking at it later on this year. I believe it's in, I can't remember what month it's in April, I think. I hope that that helps to heal this divide.
So let's say there is unification that happens down the road.
Yeah.
What's to stop a divide from happening again in the future?
Well, maybe that we've learned our lesson. I don't know. but here's what I hope that unified organization can do. What we need as an industry is a profession. We need to be a profession, and a profession is something that has disciplines and rituals and well-stated ethics and enforcement. What I'm hoping is that this body, this unified body, eventually becomes the equivalent of the AMA, the American Medical Association, or the bar for lawyers, or the professional organizations for other professions. What I'm hoping is that this unified group becomes the professional organization for all software developers and defines what professionalism means, and even has the means to enforce that the way the AMA does, the way the bar does. We are a ways away from that, but I think it's necessary.
So one last question before we move on here.
Yeah.
From a political perspective, you know, a lot of organizations who kind of were doing waterfall historically have recently started to embrace concepts like continuous integration and are now priding themselves in being agile organizations. I see that buzzword kind of being thrown around in a very loose way these days by companies. So if you were to propose a unification between craftsmanship and agile, given all the brand equity that's been built up into agile over the years, do you see potential political challenges with getting enough people on board with the idea of unification?
I think the problem, and you stated it well, it is brand equity. I don't think the unification has to have the brand agile or the brand craftsmanship. I believe that there are a core of individuals in each organization that can unify. And whether they can bring the two brands with them or not is irrelevant. They will bring the idea, and it's the idea that will survive. The brands may languish and die like structured programming did. But the idea never did die. We're all structured programmers now, we just don't know it.
Great, thank you, Bob. So let's talk about a couple of quick subjects before we go here. So
sure.
Clean code is something that you're very passionate about. Can you tell us a little bit about what you mean by clean code and how does it relate to Agile?
Well, Clean Code is the name of a book that I wrote, and it's the name of a video series that I run, and it's just a synonym for craftsmanship. clean code is well crafted. So I promote the idea that there are standards within the software development world that your code should adhere to. And in the book, I am ruthless. Many books will say things like, well, you can do it this way if you want, you can do it that way if you want. In the book, you're gonna do it this way. And I say up front, look, these are my rules. This is what I do. I do it this way, and if you want to follow my rules, you're going to do it this way. I make no bones about it. And I do this in the video series as well. You know, if you're going to follow my rules, it's going to be these rules. There's no quibbling about the rules.
Great. And then the last question I had for you was about professionalism. So can you explain a little bit about your take on professionalism, why we need it, and what do we have to do?
So what we need to become professionals is a set of standards that we don't have yet, a well-defined set of ethics that we don't have yet, and the willingness to abide by those standards and those ethics. That's what a professional is, right? A professional is someone who has the knowledge and the skill to employ their discipline, and then also has a set of standards that they refuse to cross and a set of ethics that they refuse to contravene. That's what we need to have. And if we don't have that, then our society is going to suffer greatly because of it. And our legal system is going to impose something on us that won't be anywhere near as good. So that's what I believe we need. And I also believe it needs to come from within us. I don't want it exposed from the outside, imposed from the outside. I don't want governments to tell us what being professional means. I want us to tell governments what it means for us to be professional.
Great, thank you, Bob. So let's take a couple last questions from the audience before we sign off. So Alexi, with 140 votes, asks, what is the one book that every software developer, in your opinion, must read?
Oh, it's Clean Code, of course. Actually, everyone should have like hundreds of copies. There is probably no single book that is the key to everything. There are so many good books.
What are some of your favorites? Some of the chapters, or
I'm going to go through that a little bit. I'm going up to I've got a shelf here with all my precious books. So if you haven't ever read this book, it's not even in print anymore, but you can still get it. If you haven't ever read this book, you should read this book. This is a little book. Look at how thin it is. You know, written a long time ago by some real smart guys. And what you will find in here are things like, gee, go-to might not be such a good idea. And aren't data structures cool? And oh, there are these things called objects that we can use to design our systems. Almost the entirety of the revolutions that we have undergone in the last 40 or 50 years are presaged by this lovely book. And then you should have these books. These are Knuth's The Art of Computer Programming.
Can you hold them up to the camera a little bit closer so we can see them?
Sure. Yeah. There's Knuth's The Art of Computer Programming, Fundamental Algorithms, Semi-Numerical Algorithms, Sorting and Searching. You should have these books, and you should read these books. They're wonderful to read. One of the great things about these books is that all the code is in an assembly language that doesn't exist. And if you don't know assembly language, you should learn assembly language, because assembly language is something that every programmer should learn. Wonderful stuff. You should certainly have these books. And let's see. Oh, probably the most important book written within the last 25 years is the Design Patterns book.
A great book.
And everybody nowadays thinks, well, that's so passé. You know, design patterns are so 1995. We've moved past design patterns. And no, we haven't. The book is as relevant today as it was in 1995 when it was published. If you don't know the 23 patterns in this book, you are way behind the curve. You need to know these patterns. You need to know how to be able to use them. And let's see, one more book I want to pull out here, and where is it? It should be up here somewhere. Well, I'll just tell you what it is because I don't see it. Maybe I loaned it to someone. The Structure and Interpretation of Computer Programs. And I'm going to say that again. The Structure and Interpretation of Computer Programs by Sussman and Abelson, I believe it is. And this book, by the way, is available for free on the internet. There's a PDF of it. You can download. And a programmer and you've got a few years under your belt, you read that book, it'll change your life. It's a fascinating book. There are so many other books I could recommend, but we don't have time for everything here. But those are some good ones.
Thank you so much, Bob. So before we go off the air, is there any kind of closing remarks you'd like to say to our audience?
Closing remarks. You should, as a programmer, make it your goal to go home every day proud of what you did that day. Proud of the way you did it, proud of what you did. Because you did it in a way that was ethical and principled and held to standards. That's what your life's or your career's goal anyway, your life career's goal ought to be. Every day you go home and you look in the mirror and say, today I upheld my standards, I worked to my disciplines, and I did an ethical job.
Very well said, Bob. Thank you so much. It was so enlightening to talk to you today. I'm inspired.
Oh, well, I enjoy this.
Yeah, lots of great energy. So thank you. I think our audience really appreciates you being here. So, and guys, if you enjoyed what you heard today, please consider making a donation to one of our coding nonprofits by clicking the button in this user interface. We'd really appreciate that. This is a free conference. We think it's pretty good, right? We think it's better than most physical conferences, which normally cost thousands of dollars. So, if you could spare anything for these coding nonprofits, it would be a great way to pay back the time that some of our speakers have given us today to help important initiatives that are helping diversity in programming, transforming government education, helping kids learn to code, lots of great stuff. So thanks again, Bob, for taking a stand for coding nonprofits with us today. And Bob, if you're available for a few minutes, we can have the audience talk to you privately for just a few minutes in the Hangout. Is that possible?
Yeah, that's fine.
Great. So I'll paste a link here for you guys, and feel free to join in. Thanks, Bob.